Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in as always. Hope you're staying safe out there. Hope things are going well for you and that you're taking the required precautions. As far as news goes, I don't have a ton of new personal news other than that I am maintaining. I'm still staying connected. I'm grounded in who I am. I still remember what day it is, what year it is. And I'm doing what I can to maintain my routine. An important part of that has been going outside, if only just for a little bit of time each day, to feel some sunshine on my face while maintaining a 6-foot perimeter around me at all times, as well as the occasional bagel from the heroes that still have to work at my local bagel place. Thank you. That is an important part of my day. It may be risky to some, but I assure you that we are all washing our hands constantly and taking necessary precautions to maintain a shred of normalcy while trying to flatten the curve here in New York. This might be a little bit of what the thoughts inside my mind, but it kind of goes into what I'm talking about a little bit today with my guest. My guest on the show today is actor, solo performer, and a friend of mine who's someone who's been my friend for almost half my life. Bizarrely enough, it's odd we had that moment when we were having the interview. My guest on the show today is Siobhan O'Loughlin. Siobhan I met when I was attending Towson University in the early 2000s for theater. I was a sophomore, and then she and a lot of people that are still my friends now were the freshman class after my second year. So I sort of felt like, and we'll get into the story and the interview itself. But Siobhan and I have always been had a bond because we love punk rock music, and specifically we love the band Anti-Flag. When we were in college, she and I drove all around the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, seeing Anti-Flag every time they came through town, which was frequently. I think I must have seen them 5 or 6 times during that period, and almost always they were fair, to the point where every time they come through town, we always check with the other to see if they're gonna available to go to the show. And that's a fun aspect of our friendship that I'm really psyched on. And so when I had Anti-Flag on the show late last year, I was the most excited to tell her about it and to hear her feedback. And she is doing something that I find very cool. She's currently in the midst of producing a documentary about the solo show she has spent the last 5 years touring the world performing. The show is called Broken Bone Bathtub. They're currently working on the documentary for it. And I'm going to have more information for you guys about ways that you can interact with Siobhan, support her on various platforms during this really odd time for people whose livelihood comes from the stage. So I hope you guys enjoy this interview, because it's a really great one with not only someone who's my friend, who's been my friend for a long time, but someone whose work I really enjoy and who's someone I really respect as well. So this is going to be a fun one today. If you guys enjoy the show and feel like you know someone else who might be interested in listening to this podcast, we're available on all of your favorite podcast platforms: Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. And if you guys want to get a free month of Stitcher Premium while you're socially isolating or social distancing, you can go to stitcher.com/premium and get a one month free off a premium subscription with the promo code AWESOME. And you support the show and you get access to hours of really great stuff. So thank you guys again for being here. And let's go to my chat with Siobhan O'Loughlin. And now we're recording. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm fine.
I mean,
How are you?
I guess that's a pretty relative relative question right now, given the state of the world. But I'm doing everything I can to keep my mind occupied and washing my hands constantly. So about as well as I can be currently.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hang in, I don't know. Doing our best.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you specifically. I've been starting all of my interviews with I guess a quick mental health check when with every person I talk to, and
Okay.
especially you. I'm curious because I feel like I am kind of built to because I grew up in such a remote place. I've kind of used to being alone and just being in my head a lot, but I know that that's not exactly your personality type. So I wonder how you're doing in this era of social distancing.
It's very hard for the extroverts out there. We're very lonely. We're very sad. We just want people to pay attention to us and look at us and touch us and all that stuff, and it's not happening. So, yeah, I am lucky in that I'm pretty super busy in terms of the projects I'm doing right now.
Uh huh.
So for the past today's date 12 for me, and I've been pretty like what was happening, I was like, okay, I have to jump on. I mean, I've been editing a film anyway, right? But then
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, I better jump on fundraising, for my Patreon, which means updating my mailing lists, which means I've been creating these remote shows. And, so I've kind of just had enough projects that have really kept me super busy for now. And I think having that focus on like, I got to do this and this and this, I have not been like chilling out watching Netflix. I haven't been, I don't know, having baking experiments or taking up a new instrument or a language. I really haven't had that kind of time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, still being super busy on all these creative projects is probably serving me well, especially in the event that this goes on for a long time. And then I can learn languages and bake new things, for a month. And maybe by the end of that month, there will be no more time left for me to insane. But I don't really know. But for me right now, it's like stay on top of it, Siobhan, and like on top of your things so that you're not focusing on the anxiety. I can be a very anxious person, or the loneliness can be a very lonely person as well. So yeah, that's kind of for this creative extrovert, to keeps herself busy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Been that different the past 12 days. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. You're just kind of like continuing as you would normally be, just with a different set of parameters. Now that I kind of relate to that because I'm fortunate enough that while a giant portion of my creativity, as far as being on stage, is not an option at the moment, there is this giant chunk of stuff that I can be creative doing in my apartment, be it talking to people like you, or spending some
Hmm.
time with the guitar, which I haven't don't always have as much. If I don't come out of this quarantine with like a new album, then it'll be time not well spent. is kind
All
it,
right, so the goal, I guess.
yeah, it's just like what else can I put in, what else can I throw into my brain before I get to the existential dread, like is there, and especially because especially because I've got a pretty major like life thing scheduled for late May that may or may not happen now, depending on the laws and the state of the country. So, just trying to put everything I can in front of that to keep myself from freaking out or being too downtrodden.
Is that a secret thing? What's the big life thing?
Oh, I'm getting married in late May.
Okay, I thought that might be what it was, but I didn't want to like you never know if that's a touchy subject or what. So I was like, I'm not going to ask if it's marriage and then be like, oh, that's a whole thing. But okay, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't think I don't think I ever like wrote and told you, but yeah, if the limits to groups of people still aren't happening, we might the big party might have to get postponed. But yeah, so I'm my fingers are crossed on that, but uh,
Y-
but I'm optimistic because I have no other way other option other than to be, because if I'm not, then uh, I would just be mopey in the apartment. No, but that doesn't benefit anyone.
Nobody likes that.
Yeah, but what I do, but seamless transition, because I'm great at transitions. What I do like is you, because I've known you for I have known you, I think, for maybe 15 years at this point. Does that sound right?
Yep, that's correct. That's a very long time.
It is, and
Half our lives, basically.
oh yeah, pretty much. Uh, so uh,
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
couple key memories I have from like when we were in because we went to this same college together and studied the same thing. The couple memories
Yeah.
I have of you is I remember freshman year, still just kind of like trying to get the handle of like not being at home anymore, and while also keeping my grades up. And then I remember you telling me one time that like I think you and our friend Chris Rudy had like, I don't remember the exact context of this, but you guys were talking about me in like a kind of reverential way, and that like was a little bit of a confidence boost I needed at a time when I didn't have much. So thanks for that.
You were you were in a play, and as freshmen, you don't get to be in a play. You have to audition for them for the second semester, but coming into the first semester, you just like watch the shows. And so it was very exciting to know people who made it into shows because there's more people in the department than could be in a show.
Right.
And well, we were also we were very, college freshmen acting majors. And so we thought it might make you feel good. We were also being, ourselves. And so you were taking your makeup off in the bathroom and we were like, that guy's in a play. He's taking his makeup off. And it wasn't like backstage, it was in the dorm. And so we were like, we know him. He's an actor on a stage in a show. And so when we said it so that you could hear us and you were like embarrassed, but you smiled and it's funny. Yeah, I remember us doing it. We were Yep, that's who we were.
Yeah, and I didn't have like too many, like I don't think my personality necessarily attracts like really outgoing people to me. So that was kind of cool. And the other and then when we started talking about bands, I was like, "Oh, are we best friends now?" I think that's the rule now. Because every time
Oh
like
yeah, because we were friends on Facebook. Because I just friended people on Facebook, and I saw that you were a theater major when I friended you, and you were also straight edge, and you also had a mohawk and your guitar in your profile pic, and I was like, oh my God.
yes, I guess you're picking up a lot of what I was putting out into the world at the time. Yeah, I remember having my hair like that, and I remember that guitar. I remember that guitar, and yeah, and I remember you like I think were dyeing your hair still at the time. Maybe had like
Hell yeah.
some like plaid punk rocker pants.
Yep, 100%. Pink hair.
Yeah, totally. And then I think you and I, over the course of our time there, probably saw our mutual favorite band, Anti-Flag, like maybe 5 or 6 times over the course of our tenure there. Uh,
Truly, truly, to the point where I still, if either of us goes and the other one can't go, we always will tell each other we're going or invite each other. 'Cause, yeah,
yeah,
anti-flag.
yeah,
Best band ever.
oh yeah, I so dig that this is still a part of our friendship, Siobhan, because all that stuff goes really deep with me. I don't know how far back punk rock goes for you, but I had to like eventually find like the more political stuff, or what uh, people would call like real punk, because I was like growing up on Sum 41 and Green Day and Newfound Glory, all the more poppy stuff. But once I found like
Mm.
but once I found the shouty, screamy like message, we have something to say and we're going to yell about the system. I was like, oh, okay, because that was like the perfect time for my mind to be like open, and because I was like thinking for myself for the first time maybe in a while. It was a pretty harmonious time. So what I want to ask you is how far back does your like fandom in punk rock go? Because you grew up in as our origin stories aren't too dissimilar. You're from a rural part of Maryland also, yes?
Yeah, basically, I'm from a small town called Salisbury, Maryland, is where I grew up. It's near Ocean City.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so still part of kind of the Delmarva Peninsula. That's Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. So you know, Anti-Flag was great for me because they have like melodies. So the album that I got into them with was New Kind of Army,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder what year. I don't know what year that album came out, but it was probably, oh yeah, 2008. So is that right? That
Uh,
can't be right.
I'm gonna
It's
look it up. Keep
1999.
talking.
I'm looking at it now. It's 1999. There was something on YouTube in 2008. But yeah, it's from 99. That makes much more sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I started listening to them when I was a kind of kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved music like the Casualties and the Strokes. And I'm not really into metal, but I
Mm-hmm.
love certainly, like anything like Rage Against the Machine, like music that had a crossover. It still sounded like, if it makes sense, it still sounds beautiful to me. Like I love Justin and Chris's harmonies,
Yeah, yeah.
when they sing Die for Government. And so I think that this kind of like punk music that still has like great melodies and so much energy and so much rage, and the rage like is in a very pointed direction. And I think it also comes from, I grew up on Bruce Springsteen. My
Mm-hmm.
parents are big, big Boss fans, and of course I am too. And I think that there's certainly definitely some punk spirit in Bruce's music as well, and the themes and this kind of spirit of rock and roll as a with a message, but also as a tool, in an activist's toolkit.
I agree with that
So
completely.
that's been a big part of my life, I feel like, and certainly as like 13-year-old, 12-year-old, sort of trying to understand who I was and find and feeling passionate about these things early on. Um, this kind of music really mm, meant a lot to me. So
So those
yeah,
seeds are kind of rooted early on. Yeah, I agree with you completely because I feel like Punk and Bruce Springsteen both have a kind of champion of working class people sort of ethos to them. Like I feel like they're both like rooted in like very work in like when I think of your average like uh like when I think of like people who really like Bruce and people who really like Punk, I see those. I feel like they're the same kind of people that would get together in the pub after a long day and just be like, things could be better, yeah, and then you sing about your troubles and where your mind's at. So I see that through line through both of those movements,
yeah.
100%. And I don't know if this is and this might be kind of an odd, this might be kind of an odd jump. I always feel that I felt that same kind of like I feel a lot of that spirit through folk music as well as particularly Irish folk music. Like Irish folk music, I feel like is uh, very personal and like very. I don't want to say I wouldn't want to say bleak, but some of it makes me feel that way.
Well, have you heard the Clancy brothers? I mean, they're pretty very social justice oriented
I haven't.
Fuji folk that are really. Oh, really? Okay, yeah, Tommy Makem. Yeah, the Clancy brothers are like fire. They're awesome, and they actually, have spoken on they, their their work and their analysis of racism and colonialism. And I think that an Irish perspective is actually pretty interesting in terms of colonialism globally, because they have been colonized,
Mm-hmm.
and who you ask, there's still an occupation in Northern Ireland. So you'll find that lots of Irish folks are empathetic with Palestinians in the Middle East, and there's a strong history of understanding oppression that I think is really great. That I'm not saying like blanket statement Irish people aren't racist. That's definitely not true. I'm just saying,
Hmm.
you know, um, the yeah, there's some stuff, there's some truth to what you're saying.
I think so.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a shared empathy with with the situation that other groups are finding themselves in, and and I feel like I met your brother, one of your brothers, but I don't know your I don't think I ever met your parents. What was your home life like growing up in Salisbury?
My parents are both academics, and they are both, and so that's why I say like a lot of social issues meant a lot to me early on because I was raised in a household where those things were important. So my dad was chair of the poli sci department for several years at Salisbury University, still teaches there. He currently has a class called American Empire. So he is very
Nice.
he's very progressive and has my mom as well, you know, teaching women in politics, and they're both really into political theory and ideology. And so uh, I grew up in a house that had a lot of books, and I would take it upon myself, you know, back when I had time to read, that I would just read whatever books were on their shelves. And so I read Nader, Chomsky, Zinn,
Uh
Peter
huh.
Singer, an Australian philosopher, and that's the reason why I converted to vegetarianism and then veganism eventually after that, because of the books on ethics, you know, and race and social justice that were kind of in the house.
Uh huh.
um, yeah, so my parents I'm very lucky to be someone with parents who I don't have to fight with about the president, you know, who I don't have to. I'm very lucky in that way. My brothers are also great. My older brother is now a English professor in Columbus, Ohio, and my younger brother is probably the one that you met. Is in he's in LA, and he's a musician and an actor and a filmmaker out there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
so
that's
they're
Shane.
all good, smart people. What's that?
That's is that Shane, the one in LA? I think that is the one I met.
Crap. I I probably is. Yeah, he's actually a film, so he's said young one.
Awesome. And what was the and just out of curiosity, what was the argument for vegetarianism that resonated with you?
Sure. So I read this book. I found this book that wasn't specifically about vegetarianism. It was called Writing an Ethical Life by Peter Singer, again, this Australian philosopher. And I was like, oh, cool. I want to live an ethical life. So there are various different chapters that are varying in controversy. He was, at least at the time, kind of a hot philosopher. And you know, I mean, he essentially just breaks down the factory farm industry and
Mm-hmm.
is like, this is cruel. It's cruel to animals. It's cruel to undocumented workers. It is capitalism and exploitation at its worst. And we need to boycott it. You know, we need to not participate in this. And I remember in this book, and I asked my dad, and I said, Dad, is it true that they kill cows like this? Is this how they kill cows? And dad was like, yeah, that's true. And I was like, and they put the chickens in these like little crates on top of each other, and they just like shit on each other and peg each other to death and do all this. And my dad was like, yeah, that's true. And I was like, well, we can eat them then. And my dad just kind of like sighed this big sigh, and he was like, well, you're right. We shouldn't. And my mom comes down the stairs and she's like, damn it, I knew I shouldn't have bought that book. So it it didn't happen overnight, but over time, actually, my entire family has converted to being a non-meat eating household.
Uh-huh.
And my brothers both have partners, and their partners have converted to vegetarians because of this. just because they agreed that it was right, you know?
Hmm.
And so yeah, so Shane's a vegan, everybody else is a vegetarian, but yeah, it's been a while, I think, since we've had meat in the house now.
Hmm.
But that was high school for me.
I love that. I love that the we can't eat meat is the conversation. It's like I knew I shouldn't have bought that because I feel like that conversation. I feel like if that was being said in my house, it would be for something completely different. For me, it would probably have been like, oh, Will, you're 14 and this game says like 17 and up, and I was like, I know the difference between right and wrong, mother. Uh,
Yeah, it's like what things sitting around your house will children get into, and then you will deeply, regret.
yeah,
And
deeply
mine's
regret yours.
ethics.
Oh, that's hilarious. So the seeds of your activism sound like they're sown pretty early. And when you were, this is something I always like to ask because as I've said to other guests that have been on the show, I do feel like if we had known each other in high school, we would have been very good friends earlier. Um, but I'm
Mhm.
curious when you were in high school and I don't know what like the general vibe of Salisbury is like because I'm from Calvert County where I'm from is very like southern in feel, despite the fact that if you drive like an hour north towards Baltimore, you start to get a little bit more diverse, maybe a slightly more cosmopolitan. Like, and I'm using big air quotes when I say that. So, what's the vibe of Salisbury like when you're in high school?
The spirit of Salisbury?
Yeah, like the yeah, like the kind of like vibe of the city. Does it feel like a really like red state like country kind of part of Maryland, or is it a little bit more like uh diverse for lack of a better word?
Um, I don't know. It's there is a lot there. We don't have museums or I mean, we didn't even have like when I was growing up, we had a venue at the Knights of Columbus, which is like a Catholic organization where we could put on shows, and it was cool because it's like you're not allowed to drink, but we're in high school, so it's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually that venue closed down, and I remember one of my bandmates tried to start hosting shows in this computer store. Literally, there was a computer. There was like a desktop, like those big the computers with the giant back ends on the monitors. He was trying to perform like punk shows around all of his like computers set up. It was nuts. That didn't last, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a lot for us to do to like go out and do an experience and be, you hang out at the mall, Walmart, or no balls. So you could hang out there during the day on a weekend, I guess. And that's kind of how it was. So conservative would be accurate, religious would be accurate, but I wouldn't. Yeah, there's a Unitarian church, and I would go to some like Wicca stuff at the Unitarian church, and there's a group called the Peace Alliance of the Lower Shore, PALS,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go some kind of political actions with PALS sometimes. So there were definitely people. It didn't feel wasteland, but it's also because you could still drive. It would take 2.5 hours. My parents would be cool in letting us cut school early, drive to DC to go to the 9:30 club to go
Mm-hmm.
see shows because we couldn't see shows otherwise, And um, so yeah, did kids get more into drugs and things like that? Probably not the people I was never really around that kind of stuff. So I was busy, working, hardworking. So I didn't really
Sure.
have a lot for that to get into those things.
You
But
were in
yeah,
a
that was
band in
probably
high
happening a
school?
bunch.
You were in a
Sorry,
band you were in a band in high school? I don't know if I knew this about you.
in a band? Yeah, yeah.
What did you
Oh yeah,
play?
it's you'll see it in my doc. I was sang.
Oh, awesome. And were you like
I
in
was
a
very bad at guitar, so we
And were you like in a punk band? Were you like a proto? Were you doing like the Riot Girl thing? I'm curious about this.
We did it was like emo Broadway. It would be like it was like Hedwig inspired probably. Hedwig is a crossover, I feel like, between like punk and Broadway in a good way, not in like a Green Day musical way. I haven't seen the Green Day musical. I'm being judgmental, but I'm saying like, like actual like punk origins of music narrative. But yeah. Uh a mashup. I was also very inspired by Rasputina. That was one of my favorites too in high school.
Hmm.
They're like three women with cellos that sometimes would be electric. And have you listened? Have we talked about them? Have you listened to them?
I don't know. I don't know if we have Rasputina.
Okay. Yeah, they're awesome. They are awesome.
Well, fantastic. I always like when I have new stuff to listen to when I come out of these interviews. So fantastic. So and they're like three women with cellos, you said.
But they're sort of in Nine Inch Nails status right now, where it's really the lead, her name Alora. But they were initially, but yeah, it's cellos like with distortion, and they're always wearing corsets, and they're awesome. They're like really badass and weird.
Cool. That sounds like my jam. And so you're doing like DIY uh, musical theater inspired punk rock in the one venue that's exists in town. So at what point during this do it sounds like the path towards a career in the arts is there the whole time. At what point do you decide I want to be an actor?
Yeah, I essentially always wanted to do that. I um was in performance stuff throughout high school. I was playing the piano, was, performing in bands. We didn't really have a drama club situation
Mm-hmm.
because we just weren't there. My school just didn't have the money for it.
Right.
But because I had this special, essentially, privilege of, having my dad be a professor at the university. So I was able to go be in ensemble roles in college productions where they needed a kid, a little girl or whatever. So I got to do things like that. And it was great and super inspiring. And so being a theater major was kind of just something really natural for me. And I was super lucky that my parents again were supportive and not like, no, you shouldn't have done that. Now, of course, we all regret it. They're like, oh, we shouldn't have let you. I'm like, you should not let me.
So you both agree now.
We agree that we all messed up.
That's a level of maturity I don't have. I'm never gonna tell my dad. You know what, Dad? I should have listened to you on a few things. I'm never gonna tell him that. Um, um, oh, and so now this is where I know a few of these things here. So you get from high school and to Towson, and I know a little bit about what that program is like. Although I don't know if they were still doing this when by the time you came in, but I think maybe by my second or third year, you still had to audition for the acting track, and I didn't get into the acting track, so I ended up taking general studies and then also minoring in electronic media and film. That was the first time I realized, like, oh, I should learn to do a lot of different things related to this field so that I can continue, so that I can be employable. I can't remember. Did you get through into the acting track or did you do general studies?
I was in the acting track. Yeah.
And how is that for you? Because and I know this is kind of an odd question because I know the professors and some of the peers that you might be talking about. I'm just asking it for the sake of someone who might be listening to this.
And asking how it was, how the program was, or
Yeah, I'm curious what your experience of the Towson University acting track was as far as the training. Like, what were the most useful things you pulled out of that program?
oh yeah, it was awesome. I feel like I and all my friends who are, from that program I'm still friends with are really talented, intelligent people, and we had really good training. Steve Sada was an incredible acting coach, very compassionate and empathetic, and always searching for the love in the narrative and searching for, the kindness in every story, which is a beautiful thing he gave me. And working with Stephen Nuns, who encouraged me to create my own work and do solo work and to as interview people as I was doing activist work and learn about other people, and really helped me be a make my own stuff. And so my senior year, I had written my first solo show that I performed for quite some time afterwards. Honestly, it was like this play that I've written in college that I performed as recently as 2014.
And what?
Impressive, I feel like, for some.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For your the thing you work on in college, and then that's basically your first kind of piece that you take out into the real world. Absolutely is. And what was the name of that one?
That one's called The Rope in Your Hands.
Yes, because I saw that show in a couple of different incarnations in a couple of different states, and I always thought,
Yeah.
uh, and what I liked about that show, because at this point I was doing stand up and kind of like was in the realm of like absurd observations and like what's going on with me, um, but the thing I liked about your show is not only did it do an excellent job of portraying the experiences of a lot of different people, but as far as from a performing and writing side, uh, you're doing a lot of that work, that acting training that comes from as far as like how to carry yourself when you're playing like an older woman compared to a child. I feel like that show had a really wide range as far as showing all of your strengths.
Oh, thank you.
No problem. You
That's
can,
really kind. Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't have gone and seen it several times if I did not find it to if I didn't think it was good. So if you need something for your doc or press kit, you can use that. um,
Great. Thank you.
and then and then when you were getting close to graduating, did you know that New York is where you were going to be?
No, I'd have a plan. And suddenly I was like, oh no, I don't have a plan. And I went to the Theater of the Press conference right after I graduated,
Mm-hmm.
which was in Minneapolis. Awesome. And I thought I might get a job there or something. I didn't really understand what happens when you go to conferences. And then I
Sure.
didn't. And then I took a role. Then I went back to Maryland where I was teaching theater at summer camps. And then I took a role in a show in Baltimore that summer. And then my friend Lily Hayes was like, hey, I'm looking for a roommate. Like, did you want to move to New York? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I had like $500,
Uh huh.
moved with two suitcases. Yeah, but I did.
Oh wow, yeah, that's not too dissimilar to when I eventually moved. I think I had maybe a little bit more stuff. I still had my green Ford Focus at the time that you and I drove to DC multiple times in. Um,
Yeah.
so you get to New York, and I'm curious. So you get into the city. You're living with Lily, who I haven't seen in a while. I hope she's doing well. And when you first get to city, what is your experience of New York? You said you didn't have a plan. Did you develop a plan once you got here?
No, I just tried to find a job, I guess, like just kind of like anybody else would. I just applied for a bunch of things, and eventually I worked as a cake decorator and a kind of barista and counter staff person at a cupcake shop that was in, East Midtown.
Mm-hmm.
Worked there for 2 years.
Oh yes, I remember that. I remember that
Uh,
place.
yeah, that's what I did, and I did nannying, and I became a full-time nanny. Overall, I was nannying for probably 6 years, part-time nanny while I was doing making cakes, and so I worked. I always had two jobs because I was an intern at the acting company, so I would pretty much get to either nannying or to that theater at 9 a.m. and then I would work till 11 or 12 at the bakery. So I those were the kinds of hours I was putting in for around 3 years
Yeah, just
of my time,
yeah, because that's the thing. I'd always knew New York would hard, and then I got here and I was like, oh, it's much harder than anyone can describe to you. And while you were doing that,
Yeah.
were you doing like the what I would imagine the usual new actor in New York City things are? Are you like are you like hustling for auditions or trying to find an agent while you're doing this?
Kind of. I was um yeah, you kind of have to apply to auditions. Didn't get a lot of them. I did get some. I never got cast from anything I auditioned for, but I knew a few people who needed people for things, and so I would kind of, be able to work that way. And I would just started putting out my own stuff, which meant that I would be going to, story slams, and I was doing a lot of the kind of storytelling scene, or there's just the kind of weird art scene, and then, independent theater festivals and things like that. Pretty much, I just found pretty early on that I just was very impatient in these like auditions. I just didn't book anything. I really don't. I don't know why, but I just didn't.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that because I felt like I didn't know much about how the business side of trying to be an actor went, but I think what I can do as far as on camera are there's like a handful of things because I'm tall. So I always felt like, oh, if I'll get cast as the tall thing, the number of things, the couple of waivers I got were because no tall people who were like AFTRA or union were available on a particular day.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and then you really and I don't know if this was your experience also, but then you start realizing like how much of casting is just kind of like basically checking off boxes, and if you're not in the box, then there that's it. You're not getting cast.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like done that kind of audition so long. I don't even think I can properly speak to it, but yeah, it's just not what I do.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah.
but but I think what you started doing, and I think you started this with like a rope in your hands, is the same kind of spirit that we learned from doing and attending DIY punk rock shows in like Knights of Columbus halls, or in my case like armories, or or
Hmm.
like community centers. Uh,
Hmm.
once you learn, when you start like when other people aren't making it happen for you, you start think, well, I'll just make it happen for myself, and that's what most of my peers in the comedy and storytelling community do. Is they'll just like, I'll have my own show, and then I'll meet people and do things through doing that. And I feel like that's kind of where you're at now, as far as because like I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I feel like you're basically like the punk band version of like a theater solo performer. That's what I think you do.
It's very scrappy DIY. punk that I make at this point. Yeah, I perform in people's bathtubs in their homes, in their bathrooms for an audience of however many people can fit in the bathroom, and it's usually not many. See the venue before I get there, just have the host guess how many people they think they can fit. I don't, I just show up and do it, So and it's small audiences, it's home shows, it's there's nothing glamorous about performing in a bathroom at some random dude's house. Bring some fairy lights and hang them up to try to kill the fluorescence. I used to just perform with straight fluorescent lights until finally to bring my own little light set. But before that, it was just like it didn't, like whatever.
Exactly. You
And
just kind of
so
do
it
it.
was fun. We shot a documentary for it because I've been performing this show for 5 years, 600 performances, and it's been wild. It's all over the world, honestly. And so yeah, in shooting the documentary, my DP, we have these really nice LED light panels, and he'd be setting them up in the bathroom, and I'd be like, "What the fuck is that fancy ass light in my bathroom?" He's like, "Did you want your movie to like be visible or no?" And I'm like, "Okay, I guess we can put up this fancy light." So yeah, there were some funny kind of challenges that where I was like, "That disrupts my vibe." But making a movie is it's definitely gonna disrupt your vibe.
No, no, totally. I've done my I've done some film stuff, and yeah, you just kind of do it, or like maybe we have permission to be there, maybe we don't, but let's just get the shot before we get chased off. So you did this your current show, which is called Broken Bone Bathtub. You've done
Yeah,
600, and
that's
you've
right.
done 600 performances of this, and where around the world have you done this show? Because I feel like I remember when you first started doing it, you were going to do it in Tokyo, and I think my thought was, I don't know if that's safe, but where have you performed
Yeah.
internationally? I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. In Tokyo, in so Japan, Ireland, the UK, so England, Australia, and then it was going to be in France now, well, next month, but that got canceled,
Right.
obviously.
Sure.
So yeah, so I was gonna start some European stuff, and that fell apart. So,
Uh huh.
oh well, I guess. But yeah, and I've done it in um 45 different cities in the US as well. Um,
Oh wow.
which is which is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it's a lot.
yeah, and this is just like finding people to host, and then like it's all outside of what I think would be considered uh, definitely like the traditional theater business, and I dig that because um, I feel like your show's such a original of idea that it would be intimidating to maybe some people, and then also I've heard it described as being like, because when you're so close to the people you're performing for, it's like emotionally, it sounds like it could be very intense very quickly when you're performing the show in these small
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah, it is. It's an intimate experience, which is lovely for hopefully everyone. Um, yeah, so I've been doing it for so long, and I have great, great friends in the immersive theater community who always promote my work and talk me up and, are just fabulous like that. So,
Hmm.
um, people at some point, at many points, have just heard of me. And, my website has a contact form where people can, request a show in their city, in their home. I was actually just featured on the PBS series, Immersive World, it's called. And
Hmm.
so there's a whole episode on intimacy, and that would be my show. Um, so they cover four different works that they feel are particularly intimate, immersive pieces. And that's been really cool. It was cool to be featured on that. And we just got, we just won a big, like, innovative um, award, or no, most transformational show of 2019 with Immersive Nation. So that was really fun. That was like an audience choice thing, which was really funny that people voted on that. And I'm like, I only have five people at a time. There's no way I'm gonna win this, but I did. So,
Nice.
so I've devoted we broken boners, we call them, across the country who are like, this is our jam, and continue to support me and they support my documentary was crowdfunded. I crowdfunded $40,000
That's
by
amazing.
from 320 by myself with no other else fundraising, right? Like it wasn't me and a team of people who were gathering people, right? Those are 320 people who are my people who donated. So that was more work than I would ever like to do again. And it was only 40,000, if there were two of me, it would have been 80. But
No, that's awesome.
so yeah, thank you. Thanks. And then those folks still, now that I have a Patreon that people have been really supportive of, and with my most recent project, which is called Not Touch the Artist or other audience members or your face, solo performance in solitude is my remote series, which I've been doing twice a week. So we just did our third show last night.
Hmm.
And we have another one on Saturday. There are 30-minute Zoom shows active as well. And so Brendan Lee, he's a Towson grad. He kind of TDs the shows from his location, and my facilitator Joker, room producer Dennis Young. She's based in South Carolina. She kind of facilitates the event, and so that's kind of like the new platform that I'm working on, because obviously no more shows and we don't know how long it's going to be. And it's been
Right.
really interesting. Folks really show up and like to be engaged and involved and trying to find ways to stay engaged and connected right now, because that's the kind of work that I do anyway. And trying to figure out how I can best do that through Zoom, which I don't love, which I don't feel is the same. And people have said, can't you do a digital Broken Bone Bathtub? And I'm like, no, I cannot. That is not how that show is ever going to work. And I don't want to mess it up. It's not, that's not what that show is about. That show being in a small room with other people and how that, and what that does to us and how that helps us tell stories. It's not something you could do virtually, I don't believe. So yeah, so all of that is kind of the bundle of things I've been working on. And then of course, before I got on this call, I was spot checking our most recent assemble of the documentary, which we'll be screening this weekend for filmmakers kind of in the community to kind of give us feedback and
Hmm.
do with this film, even though we can't do reshoots, seeing what we can, what we can make
Uh-huh.
until we can do some reshoots. So yeah, it's been a really dynamic community being able to do this bathtub show and meet people who are interested in this level of intimacy in theater is really special and rewarding. Hope for them. I think for them, they've supported me. People have really stood by me through all this. So
Yeah, absolutely. And to have like dedicated fans, I feel like that's what we've been trying to do since we were like rehearsing monologues and or doing like in our movement and voice classes back at Towson. That's been like the arc of the whole thing. And I agree with you because I'm not I agree with you as far as like I don't know if your type of live performance, and particularly my mode also, I don't think it translates to to live stream necessarily, because it is kind of about people being in the room with you and react and their reactions as well. Because I've seen like an explosion of stand-ups doing live streams, and you're really and you take away like the context that stand-up occurs in, and it can just come off as like the ramblings of like an insane person without the lights and the microphone. I'm like, oh, if I'm just doing this on the internet, like what's the difference between me and a call girl? Not a call girl, a cam girl. She gets paid more. That's what it is. um
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And I
Mm-hmm.
have a couple of more things I wanted to ask you before we get out here, because I imagine you're super busy, but I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me, Siobhan, because I know we've been trying to like connect over the last couple of years, but each of us just have been like so busy. So I'm glad we had this time now. So thank you. Um, I'm cu-
Yeah.
so my second last question is, um, the idea for the documentary, does that come from you after wanting to document this show that you've been working on for so long, or where did the idea to film this documentary come from?
It's sort of a long story, but I guess the short, and I'll try to do it the least dramatic versions, that a number of filmmakers have been interested in this show as a doc because, like, it's fun, it's quirky, it's a naked lady in a bathtub, it's really sad and beautiful, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I was in Houston, Texas, the producer that I had was should totally be a documentary, and I was like, yeah, that's been a conversation that people want to work on it and then they're not available, and was saying that was like I'm available, and so I scheduled this tour to film to for this person to go with me, and that person totally ditched the project. Was not a great collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ditched the project, but then offered to like still produce and fundraise like from a distance. And I was like, yeah, there is no film because you're not filming it. And I don't know enough people. And then I talked to a producer in St. Louis who was like, I will produce it. We just need to find you a DP. So it was like, okay. So I flew to LA and I met with a DP and I called the St. Louis person and I was like, have a DP, and the St. Louis person ghosted me for a week. So so basically I just was like, okay, well, I guess I am doing this on my own and just hiring people because there's they really let you down. Sometimes they don't, but boy, it is a crapshoot for like how how all of that stuff can go. And it was hard because I kind
Yeah.
of had like two hits in a row of just people who just let me down. Um, so whatever. So then I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm fundraising all this stuff by myself and working with, so then I called a friend here in New York who I've worked with for a long time and know quite well. And I was like, I know what to do. And he was like, oh, all right, let's hire this guy in LA and I will edit this and produce it and let's like make this happen. You just got to figure out how you're going to fundraise. So his name is Edgardo Parada, and he has a company called Shake Up Productions here in New York. He's been kind of like family to me in a lot of ways. I'm here in his home right now as I speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, so with him and then with my DP, Diego, we shot 6 weeks of shows and 35 performances and all of these 15 different locations we traveled to. And it was just wild, wild. It was so busy and I was so overwhelmed. I was fundraising while I was filming. It was really, really tough. But you know what? I actually, as I was saying, I'm spot checking this movie. I actually really like my movie. I think it's kind of going to be great. And you know what's cool is it's my movie. It's not some asshole from some other state,
Is
one of
that
their movies. It's not those people's, it's mine. And I think it's really tough because when you are let down by people And I'm not here to say like I'm totally innocent person, that I've never let anybody down. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in this circumstance, I was let down. And you get a lot of advice from different people. People are like, you know what, now it just seems like now is not the time to do it. You should just not do it because it's too hard. You should stop. Or you're never going to raise that money. Or you're too sad. You're crying much. You're too upset. And it's a bad time. But the reality is that what was I going to do? Cancel my tour? Was I going to tell all these producers that it wasn't happening? I'm not the quitter. This other person is the quitter. You know what I mean? Not me. So it's like, what do? You kind of have to say, okay, I will tell everyone that I quit. And that's not my fault necessarily, but it's not going to happen. That's a reality. And I respect people who make that choice. But if you don't do it, then you're probably not going to do it. Like, what was I going to do it this spring instead? Nope.
Yeah.
I wasn't. Right. So I sort of had to sink or swim. And I chose, and I felt strongly that even if my film sucks, like, I will still regret not documenting this experience, which has been 5 years of my life. It outlasted my longest relationship. It outlasted any place I've ever lived as an adult. It's the kind of the thing that defines me as in a lot of ways, as what I do,
Mm-hmm.
who I am, all that kind of stuff. So I just decided to do it, and yeah, and it was hard, and I think that we all have a lot of choices to make creatively. And I think sometimes saying that you're still going to do it is the hardest one, because there are people, there are people who loved me very much when I was fundraising, who are like, there's no way that you alone can raise $40,000. I sat on, it was my Seed and Spark campaign was like sitting at 7,000 for a week. Like it
Mm-hmm.
didn't budge,
Yeah.
and and one of my friends in Nashville, who loves me dearly, was like, I just don't know that you're going to make this.
Well,
But I did.
yes, I feel like you're definitely one of the types of people who, if you want to tell, if someone wants to tell you, I don't know if you can do this, you're going to be like, fuck you, I'm going to do it. To and I've always admired,
Totally.
and I've always admired that spirit about you, Siobhan.
Thank you. It is a good point. As soon as somebody's like, that doesn't seem likely, you're like, fuck off. It sure is, even though it's not. I mean, my mom, she's so awesome when, things are feeling really dire and bleak. And my mom always says, she's like, well, it's over till it's over. And, that's how I felt about my campaign, and how I feel about Bernie Sanders, and how I feel about,
Mm-hmm.
the end of the world. It's not over till it's over.
I agree, and at least even if you lose, you can at least know that you went down doing what you believed and what you felt. That's how I feel about that as well. And the last question I wanna ask you, Siobhan, it's the same way I ended
Yeah.
when I talked to Justin and Chris, and the fire alarm started going off. Um, gi-
Yeah.
give
Love that. Love them. Could be working on the film, by the way. Uh, we're trying to figure out how to make him. He's gonna lay down some bass and some vocals for some stuff that my brother's composing, which we're like, woo, stoked about.
I am so happy to hear
So
that. I'm so stoked. I have a he produced Chris Dose produced the new record for a band called Blind Adam in the Federal League, and I just interviewed him. That'll be out next week. So my fingers crossed.
wow,
I'll get to interview some more A through F artists. That'll be pretty fun. So I'm really excited to
that's awesome.
I'm really excited to hear that he might be involved in your in your documentary. I will say this. I did feel really cool after we took that selfie, because they were standing, because when they came in to do my show, I was like, I have a friend. We have seen you guys so many times together. When I send her this picture, she will lose her mind. So I
And
will
I did.
I will admit feeling like pretty cool that day. But the last thing I wanted to ask you is the same thing I asked them. When you get confronted with creative collaborators and people like that story you just told me where people have let you down and you find yourself with like nobody in your corner, or you look at
Mm.
the state of the world and the Senate and the response to like COVID-19, or just the way things are sometimes. What keeps you optimistic, and what keeps you? Because you've always, I feel like, as long as I've known you, you've always been a fairly, you're a pretty optimistic, bright side of life kind of thinking. What keeps you from falling to the pit of cynicism?
Well, let me not lie to you and tell you that I definitely despair very often and get really depressed. So I think that should be really clear that that's something I do. I definitely, my life is like artist, activist. That's kind of the stuff that I do. So like up until we weren't allowed to go outside, I mean, I knocked on doors after Super Tuesday for Bernie Sanders. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know, fuck it. Like I really believe in getting out. Well, okay, this doesn't make sense now, but like getting outside and meeting with people to phone bank and to canvas is so productive, and it makes you feel better because knocking on people's doors, yeah, people will say go away, whatever, but people will also open the door and you have cool conversations and you're volunteering with bad who are so kind and generous volunteering their time, and it's so much better than the Twitter, hellscape.
Oh, tell me about it.
you know yeah, so I think that like getting involved, while my therapist is like, do you have time to continue to devote all this to Bernie Sanders? Like you're not really seeing and you're volunteering all the time for Bernie Sanders, but I force myself to like get out there, and then I'm there, and I'm a part of the Democratic Socialists of America that did, and like being there with all those amazing people, it makes me feel better. It really gives me hope and strength. And right now it's hard because that's all that being togetherness has really been taken away from us.
Right.
And I've resorted to like, oh shoot, I'm an artist, all my shows are canceled. I need to fundraise. I need to do my Patreon special offer for people to see my film, and that's what I'm trying to do to help up my just life, skills, patronage, all that sort of thing. And that's kind of where I'm focusing. And it's hard to balance between art and activism, but the art community can also be super rewarding. Honestly, I'm doing these remote shows, and last night's was awesome. And we had around 17 to 20 people. There were opportunities, the interactive moments where people are participating more actively, telling stories, and sharing these connections and finding the ways that creativity fueled by activism, fueled by the desire to help people connect to each other, and that we feel stronger and safer and more secure, that we help each other, is what a sound social structure would be built on. I think that's the kind of world that we ideally advocating for, is one where we can trust each other and rely on each other and lean on each other. And if we bail on a project, which people do, you say, okay, Will, I am bailing on this project, but let me give you 3 other people who would be great that I've spoken to that you should call, right? That's
Right. Right.
that's the world we live in, right? And that's what we're trying to build through social justice and through those things. So being active and being involved and doing these remote shows is, as much for me as people will write to me and say, oh, I felt so connected in that group of strangers. And I think that is wonderful. And I think that that's really, it's something that certainly makes me feel better, which is not to say I don't feel really, really down and sad too. I think for me, uh, I feel both. And that's the world I live in, and maybe the world
Mm-hmm.
you live in too. That we're really capable of the extremes, and we have to be willing to stay on the ride with those extremes being our lives. You know.
Yeah. I absolutely relate to that. I tend to get really upbeat and have a million ideas at once, or I am just like a blob on the couch. It's like, oh, I can't do it, man. I just don't know. I just don't know. So, but and I feel
Mm,
and I've come to this and I've come to this now, and I don't know if it's a very like cheerful kind of nihilism that I've embraced or what exactly, but I just kind of like I really I'm very excited to work on the stuff that I work on, and I'm really excited creating the stuff that I'm currently creating. So that brings me uh, enough joy, and then I try to make the conscious. I try to laugh more. I try to make the decision to laugh more than cry, and sometimes it's difficult because they're kind of two sides of the
mm,
same coin. If that makes any sense.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but just kind of laughing at the just kind of like laughing and then getting and then like being able to like and this is like the therapeutic part of like the storytelling stuff I do, like being able to like laugh at painful things or like painful memories gives me like a small sense of control over the memory, and I confront it, and then the laugh is the community building, like when I'm on the stage, and even though I'm not on stage right now, this is what I'm doing with this podcast, which I've done like 100 over 130 something episodes by myself pretty much. Get technical help here and there for like
Yeah.
get technical help for like the for like the big guests I get that I really want to make sure goes right. But like I talked to Evan from Into It Over It, a band that I really love, like for an hour and a half last week, and what others reality there's so many other realities where that was never going to happen for me. So the fact that it happens pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, I know, right? That's I relate to that. And I think, yeah, I think we have to create a world, and I'm trying to be better at it. I bet a lot of people are actually right now. It's like when people write to me that I'm trying to write back, and it's hard for me because I get so overwhelmed with messages and things, and because I do everything on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot. And you relate to that. But even if I'm like, hey, I'll get to you to hang in there, you're not alone. So we have to try to remember that we're not alone. It may not always be the person we thought that was going to be there with us to support us, but that's okay. You got to keep going.
That's that
And the reason, yeah, I was just gonna say the reason to keep going is like kind of what you're saying. And I was watching, I'm a real Bernie stan these days, and I know I'm talking about him like 15 times, but like watching his Senate floor speech is like, you know what? Bernie doesn't give a fuck. He's up here and poor people don't deserve to eat, do they? They don't deserve to go to the doctor. They're inferior because they're poor. It doesn't matter if they need to pay rent. Like he's just railing on the Senate floor. And I'm like, you know what? This guy is like gonna go down swing. He doesn't give a fuck. And I just need to remember that like that's who I'll be, you know? I'm gonna be that way too.
yeah, it's a pretty excellent. I think it's a great way to operate, and I think that's a great way to close this out, Siobhan. I really appreciate that you took the time to talk to me. I'll turn my camera on real quick so I can give you a proper goodbye. And while I'm doing that, what can we plug before we get out here? Where are you on Patreon and the internet?
Sure. I mean, mainly, well, gosh, my name is so very difficult to spell. But so I guess the easiest thing, since we're not typing, is if you go to brokenbonebathtub.com, then you can see all of the ways to reach me via Patreon and to sign up for my remote shows. Actually, my remote shows will be playing. They're pay what you can. And I will do them as long as I can afford to, and as long as we're having this pandemic. So I can perform for anyone, anywhere, because I do them twice a week. So, yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you so much for doing this, Siobhan. And send me those links, so I'll put them in the description.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I will. That's great. Nice
Excellent.
to see you, Will.
Nice to see you too, Siobhan. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Talk to you soon. All right, folks, that's our show for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Siobhan's been my friend for a very long time, and it was great to get to have this kind of chat with her on the show. I really enjoyed getting to have that conversation. If you guys want to check out anything that she has got going on, including her remote shows, you can visit the website www.brokenbonebathtub.com. That's brokenbonebathtub.com. You'll find links to all of her live streaming schedules and her Patreon. We're all trying to figure out how to keep doing this, doing our things together. And I'm glad that she's persevering, and I'm very excited to eventually get to see that documentary. So again, that's brokenbonebathtub.com if you want to check out what Siobhan has going on. And if you enjoyed this podcast and want to share it with others, we are available on all the major platforms, Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. If you want to get a free month of Stitcher Premium, you can go and sign up with the promo code AWESOME. That gets you a free month. That's access to hundreds of comedy albums, ad-free archives, a lot of stuff to listen to that I really enjoy as well, because I've been using Stitcher Premium for several years now, and I really enjoy it. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Comic Will Carey. And I also want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. And you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster and check out some of the stuff that I've got going on over there. And guys, stay safe, wash your hands, and maintain and stay home if you can, because that's what we'll need to do to get through this sooner. So thank you guys again for listening, and I will see you next time between Awesome and Disaster.